Are you afraid of what lurks in the shadows? Of entities that watch us from the darkness? If so, you won't want to miss this bone-chilling tale. Welcome to the Shadow Man, a terrifying entity that watches from the darkness, where we explore the haunting legend of a servant wrongly accused, executed, and now trapped in an old, abandoned house. When a family moves in, they experience terrifying paranormal occurrences that lead them to uncover the truth behind the legend. But will they be able to banish the malevolent spirit, or will they become its next victims? Follow us as we explore the scary world of the paranormal and learn how dangerous it can be to talk to things we don't understand. Don't turn off the lights because the Shadow Man might be closer than you think. There was a family who had been searching for a new home for months, but nothing seemed to fit their budget and their needs. They were about to give up hope when they stumbled upon a dilapidated old house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Despite its rundown appearance, the house had an old-world charm that appealed to the family, and they decided to take a chance and move in. As they began to settle into their new home, the family members started to notice strange occurrences. The first incident was when the family's cat, Tilly, hissed and growled at a corner of the living room. The family thought it was strange, but they dismissed it as just the cat being curious about her new surroundings. A few days later, the family heard strange noises coming from the attic. They heard footsteps, rustling, and faint whispers. They thought it might be a rat or some other animal, but they couldn't shake off the feeling that there was something else up there with them. Then, one night, the youngest daughter, Emily, woke up in the middle of the night and saw a shadowy figure standing at the foot of her bed. She screamed for her parents, and they rushed to her room. But by the time they got there, the figure had disappeared. The family members were frightened, but tried to convince themselves that it was just their imagination. However, as time went on, the occurrences became more frequent and more intense. Objects began to move on their own. Doors opened and closed by themselves, and strange smells wafted through the house. The family began to research the history of the house and discovered that it had been abandoned for years after the previous owner, an old woman, had died in the house. According to the neighbors, strange things had always happened in the house, and it was widely believed to be haunted. Despite their fear, the family decided to stay and try to make the best of the situation. However, they couldn't shake off the feeling that they were being watched, and they started to feel like they were not alone in the house. One night, the family decided to hold a seance to try to communicate with the entity that was haunting their home. They lit candles and held hands as they called out to the spirit. Suddenly the room went dark, and a cold breeze swept through the room. The family members screamed in terror as they saw a shadowy figure looming over them. They quickly ended the seance and huddled together in fear. The family knew they had to do something to get rid of the entity that was haunting their home. But they also knew that they were dealing with something beyond their understanding, something that was not of this world. The family members began to question their decision to stay in the house, but they also knew that they couldn't just leave it behind. They had to face the thing and figure out how to get it out of their house. Little did they know that their decision would lead them down a dark path, one that would test their courage and sanity to the limit. As the family continued to experience strange occurrences in their new home, they began to research the history of the house. They spoke to the neighbors and searched through old records, hoping to find some clue about what was causing the strange happenings. One day, they stumbled upon an old book in the local library that told the legend of the Shadow Man. According to the legend, the Shadow Man was a servant who had worked for the homeowner over a century ago. He was accused of stealing a valuable piece of jewelry, but he said he didn't do it. Despite his protests, he was found guilty and executed. The legend went on to say that the Shadow Man's spirit had been trapped in the house ever since, seeking revenge on the descendants of the homeowner who had wronged him. Many families had tried to live in the house over the years, but they were all driven away by the entity that came to be known as the Shadow Man. The legend shook the family, but they also felt relieved that they had finally discovered some explanation for the strange occurrences in their home. They decided to learn more about the story in the hopes of finding a way to face the Shadow Man and end his reign of terror. They spoke to the local historian, who told them that the legend of the Shadow Man had been passed down through the generations. but no one had ever been able to confirm its truth. However, the historian did tell them about an old diary that had been found in the house many years ago. The owner of the house, who had accused the servant of stealing, had written about the Shadow Man's trial and execution in his diary. The family was eager to find the diary and learn more about the legend. They searched the house from top to bottom but couldn't find it anywhere. It wasn't until they decided to search the attic that they stumbled upon a hidden compartment in the wall. Inside, they found the old diary, covered in dust and cobwebs. As the family read through the diary, they found out that the owner had, in fact, made up the story that the servant stole the jewelry. The homeowner had actually lost the piece of jewelry and had accused the servant in a fit of rage. The servant insisted until the end that he was innocent, but he was still put to death. As a result of what they had learned, the family was horrified and realized that they had to confront the Shadow Man in order to put an end to his terror. They began to research ways to banish spirits and protect themselves from supernatural entities. However, as they dove deeper into the world of the paranormal, they began to realize that they were dealing with something far more dangerous than they had initially thought. The Shadow Man was not just any spirit. He was a vengeful entity that had been trapped in the house for generations, seeking revenge on those who had wronged him. The family knew that they had to tread carefully if they wanted to survive the encounter with the Shadow Man. Despite their fear, the family was determined to confront the Shadow Man and put an end to his reign of terror. They started trying out different ways to talk to ghosts in the hopes of getting in touch with the thing that had been haunting their house for generations. One day, the eldest daughter suggested that they try using a Ouija board to communicate with the Shadow Man. At first, the family was hesitant because they knew that using such a tool could be dangerous. But the daughter was insistent, and they eventually agreed to give it a try. They set up the Ouija board in the living room, lighting candles and dimming the lights. They placed their fingers on the planchette and began to ask questions, hoping for a response from the Shadow Man. To their surprise, the planchette began to move on its own, spelling out answers to their questions. They asked the Shadow Man why he was haunting the house and if there was anything they could do to make him go away. At first, the Shadow Man's answers were vague and hard to understand, but he eventually showed himself to be a bad guy with bad plans. He told them that he had no intention of leaving and that he enjoyed tormenting the living. As the family continued to communicate with the Shadow Man, they began to feel a sense of unease. The atmosphere in the room grew darker, and they could feel a chill in the air. Suddenly, the planchette began to move rapidly, spelling out strange and terrifying messages. Before they knew it, the Ouija board had become a conduit for the Shadow Man's malevolent energy. They could feel the presence of the thing in the room, and they started to get hurt. The candles flickered and went out, and they could hear strange noises coming from all around them. The family members tried to leave the room, but they found that they were trapped. The door wouldn't budge, and they were surrounded by an invisible force that seemed to be holding them in place. Panic set in as they realized that they had made a grave mistake. They had accidentally let a bad thing into their home, and now they were at its mercy. The family members began to pray and plead with the entity to let them go, but the Shadow Man only laughed in response. It wasn't until they remembered the protection spells they had researched earlier that they were able to break free from the Shadow Man's hold. They said the spells as hard as they could, and in the end, the thing just disappeared. After seeing the Shadow Man, the family members were scared and traumatized. They realized that they had underestimated the power of the paranormal, and that they had put themselves in grave danger by using the Ouija board. From that day on, they vowed to never mess with the unknown again, and to do everything in their power to protect themselves from malevolent entities like the Shadow Man. After the scary thing that happened with the Ouija board, the family knew they needed help to get rid of the Shadow Man. They got in touch with a local paranormal investigator who had dealt with bad spirits before. The investigator arrived at the house and began to assess the situation. After doing some research, he found out that the Shadow Man was a strong, bad spirit that would not leave the house on its own. The investigator suggested that they must confront the Shadow Man to banish it from the house. He advised them to prepare themselves with spiritual items such as holy water, sage, and salt. The family members were hesitant, but agreed to the plan. Together, they made their way to the attic, where the Shadow Man was said to reside. The atmosphere was tense, and they could feel the entity's presence growing stronger with every step they took. As they entered the attic, They could see a dark figure lurking in the shadows. It was the Shadow Man, and he was more terrifying than they could have ever imagined. The investigator told the family to say protection spells and sprinkle holy water and salt around the area. The family members did as they were instructed, but the Shadow Man was not intimidated. As they continued to confront the entity, it became clear that it was not going to leave willingly. The Shadow Man began to attack them with incredible force, throwing objects at them and causing the room to shake violently. The family members were terrified, but they refused to give up. They fought back with all their might, throwing salt and holy water at the entity in an attempt to weaken it. The confrontation lasted for what seemed like hours, with the Shadow Man growing stronger with every passing moment. But eventually, the family members' determination paid off. They managed to banish the entity back to the darkness from where it came. As they came out of the attic, they were tired and sad, but they were glad that the Shadow Man was gone. They thanked the investigator for his help and vowed to never let their guard down again. From that day on, the family members lived in peace, free from the haunting presence of the Shadow Man. They had learned a valuable lesson about the dangers of the paranormal and were grateful for the help of the investigator, who had helped them banish the malevolent entity. After the scary fight with the Shadow Man, the family members were traumatized by what they had been through. They realized that the paranormal was not something to be taken lightly, and that they had put themselves in great danger by attempting to communicate with the entity. As a result, the family decided to move out and sell the house. They called a real estate agent, who didn't know the house was haunted, but agreed to sell it for them anyway. As they packed up their belongings and prepared to leave, the family members couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. They knew that the Shadow Man was not just tied to the house, but also to their family, and they feared that they would never be truly free from its clutches. As they drove away from the house, they saw the shadowy figure standing in the window, watching them. It sent shivers down their spines, and they knew that the Shadow Man was not done with them yet. Over the next few weeks, strange things began to happen to the family. They would hear strange noises in their new home and catch glimpses of the shadowy figure out of the corner of their eyes. They knew that the Shadow Man was still with them and that they had not escaped his grasp. The family members became increasingly paranoid and fearful. They sought the help of the paranormal investigator once again, but he could not offer any solutions. He warned them that once a malevolent entity has attached itself to a family, it can be nearly impossible to get rid of it. The family tried to go about their daily lives as best they could, but the constant feeling of being watched and haunted was taking its toll on them. They couldn't help but wonder if they would ever be able to live a normal life again. Eventually, the family members decided to seek out a spiritual healer. The healer did a series of rituals and blessings for the family, and over time, the Shadow Man's presence started to go away. Although they were never truly sure if the Shadow Man was truly gone, the family members were able to live a relatively normal life once again. They had learned a valuable lesson about the dangers of the paranormal, and they knew that they could never let their guard down again. In the end, the family moved on from the experience, but they knew that the haunting presence of the Shadow Man would stay with them forever. They could only hope that they had done enough to keep themselves and their loved ones safe from the entity's malevolent influence. Thanks for joining us on this spine-tingling journey into the world of the paranormal. We hope you enjoyed the Shadow Man, a terrifying entity that watches from the darkness. Remember, when it comes to entities beyond our understanding, it's always better to seek help than to face them alone. If you have a spooky tale to share, leave a comment below, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel, TheTaleKeepers, for more bone-chilling stories. Stay safe out there and remember, the shadows might be watching.